Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dhammaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. Dutiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Dhammaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. Tatiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Dhammaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. So it's now summer again. So I've got 40 minutes, so 9 or 17:40. So now summer again. It's a full-on summer. There's lots of warmth, and it was kind of an interesting week for me this week. I came back. I went to visit some family in Windsor, and then came back yesterday. And there's a kind of a very senior monk in town, so two friends of mine hosting him at their house, and so they kindly arranged for me to meet him. And went there, and he's kind of a very senior monk, and so I want to ask him some questions. And so one of the questions I asked him was about teaching, and he told me this kind of really interesting story, because I asked him if you're teaching people who are, basically like a lot of people in the West, they're not born, Buddhists, kind of paraphrasing here, but because they're not born Buddhists, you can't, just jump in there and, teach them all about, renunciation and, give up your, it's like, wait a minute, what did I sign up for? What am I doing here? And so you have to kind of, so I was curious, you have to teach them gradually. And I said, well, how do you do that without, dumbing it down? Without kind of making it, something that's, accessible but doesn't really give the proper results. And so he said, well, what he said was, well, you have to respect your audience. He said, don't think, respect them in the sense, don't think because they're lay people, they won't be able to understand these kind of things. And he said, well, you have to teach about renunciation in terms of letting go. And he said, in terms of the other things that are controversial, he talked about kind of a rebirth. He said, if people say, well, I don't believe in rebirth, and you say, well, there's this evidence, and they say, well, because there's no evidence, you say, okay, here's the evidence. And he told me this interesting story then. He said, there was this they do this kind of like past life regression. And I've always been kind of skeptical of this like therapy. I don't know how they do it. They kind of maybe ask you, okay, think back, and I don't know. I'm not too sure. But he told this story. He had all these stories. Like there was a story like for every point that he made. Like they were good stories too. Not just like they were like genuinely good, relatable stories. I think he has like a lot of stories to tell. And so this particular story that he told, he said there was this young woman who in Australia who was dying of anorexia. And she was kind of, went to this last-ditch effort. Her mother took her to this past life regression. And so she's in the past life regression, you're going back, and I don't know what they did. But he said, they kind of went through this regression. And then she started to remember, that in her past life, she was the younger of these two sisters. And these two sisters, there's this guy that they both started to like. Both started to compete for his attention. And then basically the older sister was a lot, prettier or something like that. So the guy went for the older sister. And somehow this younger sister got so depressed, I can't remember how she ended up dying, but she ended up maybe committing suicide or something like that. And when she was relating this, her mother started going hysterical. And they had to take the younger sister, the young lady out of the room. And the mother started going hysterical because it turned out that was her younger sister. So this young lady was so obsessed with this fellow that she got reborn as his daughter. And he said that after the past life therapist had gone through this kind of regression, then, and then she realized, okay, she still was so wanting to be beautiful. So she was starving herself to try to make herself beautiful as a result of this kind of past karma that she had, with this fellow. And so this is what he told me in response to, this question about teaching lay people. He had other kind of interesting stories. But this one is always kind of very, interesting, because what the Ajahns say, and kind of this Ajahn, he went on to talk about like jhanas and these things, and he started talking about like, you got the sense, the way he was talking about, being able to remember past lives and these kind of things, and you got the sense he could do it. And one of the interesting things about this, like when the Ajahns say, like these teachers who have these kind of jhanas say, is that, there's quite a lot of these connections between the various people that one meets, between the habits that one has in the present and the habits that one might have had in the past. And the interesting thing about samsara is just this, oftentimes people will tend to think of themselves as a person's mother, father, whatever, wife, friend, but you can be somebody's sister and end up as their daughter. There was this story, I can't remember where I heard it, I think it might have been in the canon. There was this kind of Brahmin who was an evil man, and he got really attached to some gold that he had stashed in his house. And as a result of this kind of attachment, when he died, he got reborn, I think, as a chicken in his house. and then his former family killed and ate him. I think this was the kind of story, So, anyways, giving this in the spirit of what this this monk said. So all of this is because, the thing about samsara, the thing about our lives in samsara, is that it's a double-edged sword. We think about, human birth. Being a human is great, you have this kind of trajectory. Okay, get my job, get my car, have my career, I've got my kind of family, and this is the way it's going to go. And it's kind of contextualized in this one lifetime paradigm. You have this one lifetime, and it seems all right. So, just today went to a dana, and at this dana was, I'm not mentioning the people, of course, but the dana was actually for a young man who, not to make this talk really heavy, but who committed suicide. And so his family was very distraught. You could tell. And I saw his photo, he was a young guy, maybe like 34, I don't know how old he was. Good looking guy, and don't know what was going on in his life. But these people, his family, were, quite, upset about that. And this is the kind of thing, so at the end, the chief monk asked me to give a talk. And we were talking a little bit about the same thing before, because I was telling what I did. I was like, what I was up to yesterday, and okay, I met this monk, and this is what he said, and he's like, and I was telling him about some other things that I'd said in talks, and I was like, I don't know if if I should say this, and he's like, in Sri Lanka, they say some, like the Sri Lankans, they lay it out, you go to a funeral, you're expecting to hear, stuff about like impermanence, stuff about samsara. But in any event, he said, you have to give an English talk at this dana, and when you do, you should make it about impermanence. It's impermanence. So this is one of the things about the way that samsara works. It's kind of weird in some ways. It can end up in all these various things. But it's also a double-edged sword. We have this kind of, term in English, double-edged sword. And it's not to say that, the world is such a bad place, there's nothing good in it. The Buddha teaches about making good karma, because there's good things that can happen in the world. I think last week, talking a lot about these kind of two different patterns. Can you have this pattern of things that, you take them, they're kind of quick and easy, you have this overwhelming sensation, but they go down. This other pattern of things that are, slow, beginning painful, but they build up. And this kind of second pattern of things is very pleasant. You can be very happy. And for people who follow this second pattern, when they pass on, their journey, their story in samsara is not a tragic story. Okay? Actually, you think about, I remember when I was young, I'd think about dogs. And you see, like, I had a cat. Okay? You see this cat. And, I used to love reading books. And I would think, this cat doesn't know anything about reading books. He has just no idea about the pleasure of reading books. His world is like food, walking, laying in the sun. That's what he does. And he doesn't know anything else. It's just, that's it. Kind of has these kind of simple, these few pleasures. And then looking at his food, it's like this mush. It's kind of smelly. And as a human, you're like, I will not eat that food, no matter what. The cat, it's so delicious. And in the same way, the human realm has these qualities of sensual pleasures, and there are realms above us, realms of devas, realms of different beings, and their sense of what's pleasant just outstrips the human realm in ways that people can't imagine. We need to have planes to fly all over the place, and these various things. These devas are, they're called gods almost for a reason. They know what people are thinking. They can just disappear, go to another place. They have various types of abilities to make things happen, and kind of, these classic things. You can imagine their level of pleasure is something we just don't imagine. Right? It's hard to imagine. It's like a kind of a person looking at a cat. The cat has these pleasures. That's what the cat knows. It only cares about those pleasures, but there are pleasures that are higher. There's ways that are higher to go in samsara. But the point of this talk was that although, there's these various things in samsara, there's these various ways to go, what tends to creep over a person's mind in samsara is this kind of, delusion, basically. It's what holds people to this kind of cycle of being born and dying. Is this thought that being born and dying or just having whatever I've got is really great. It's kind of this excellent, this is good, this is the way it should be. Any deviation from that is just like something that's a blip. It's not really supposed to happen. It'll only happen for a short time. And that's the way it is. We have this kind of viewpoint of our life. People have this viewpoint of their life. The way their life's going to be, it's going to be like this, like this, like this, like this. And this is grabbing onto one edge of the sword. So, the Buddha uses this kind of simile, it's called the simile of the snake. It's this way, he doesn't, I'm not sure, I don't think he uses it in this context particularly. But the way that sensual pleasures work, the way that these various things work that keep people stuck in samsara is they grab onto the tail of this kind of snake. It kind of seems, oh, well, it's nice and smooth, grab onto it and, tie it in a bow, whatever, have some fun with it. But the head comes around and bites. And that's how it works. There's always a head and a tail. Snakes and ladders, and you got the head, you got the tail. You don't just have a two-tailed snake that you can just grab any end. It's always got this sharp end, like a knife, handle first. So in any event, this is the way it works in samsara. We have this thought that it's going to be this way with our life. And then when something deviates from the way it should be, it can be overwhelming. It can be very difficult. But actually the point of this, coming across in this particular talk this morning was that actually that's the way samsara is designed. That's the way that it really is. Really, it's not like it's terrible all the time. It's not like it's great all the time. But it's the things that make it great. Things that are essentially, these external things, our family, our friends, whatever, nice sunsets. Not to say these are terrible things. I'm giving you guys the talk that the Ajahn recommended. But it's the fact of these things that in grasping onto them, one creates this kind of sense of identity around them. One creates this idea that these things are mine, builds up this sense of identity, and that sense of identity leads people onwards. Leads people onwards to states of becoming, states where they're mothers, states where they're fathers, states where they're whatever they are. And whatever comes into that state to disturb it, whatever comes into that state to change it, can be a shock. So although, these kind of things, what I said in this talk as well was, this thing like somebody committing suicide is horrible. It's a very terrible thing. You don't wish it on anybody else. And, it's the kind of thing you think should always happen to somebody else. But if you stay at a temple, see, before, I never lived in like a community so much. Like, I lived in a monastic community. But the way that the Buddhism functions in the daily lives of people in Buddhist countries is in almost every aspect of their life. Okay? Every aspect of their life has this element to it of the Dhamma. They want to imbue every aspect of their life with the Dhamma. And so if you're a monk, then you go to like all these different occasions in people's lives. And the thing that seems so unusual is just not. It happens all the time. Great things happen to people all the time. Terrible things happen to people all the time. In between things are constantly happening to people all the time. All these things are always happening. And so because all these things are always happening, what happens with this kind of delusion is this thought that, these things will never happen to me. If a great thing happens, the person rushes out to grab it. A new baby is born, a new job comes, rushes out to grab it, and this kind of delusion covers the mind. Like, this will never change. Although we know, reading a book, it's going to change, this thought will never change. And so then when tragedy strikes, a person doesn't have another type of refuge. Just like I remember reading this book back in high school. I think it was high school, university, I can't remember, but it was high school English. And in this book, there were these two kind of guys that love to race. It was kind of this. It was a fictional book, and the one guy got jealous of this other guy who was always like winning all the races, and so they would do this thing where they would climb out to a tree, and they would jump off this tree branch into the lake. And so the guy who got jealous, when the guy was about to jump, the guy was a fast runner. He jumped on the tree and shook it, and the guy who was a really fast runner, fell off the tree. And broke his legs, and he could no longer run after that. So he was a very slow runner after that. The other guy became faster. But the point of this is that, that these kind of things in samsara are like tree branches. You compare these various things that come into people's life to the branch of a tree. And of course, in climbing a tree, we have to grab onto the branches to go up. But the dangerous thing is, or the thing about it is, if we go out onto the edge of a tree branch and put all our weight on that tree branch, whatever winds come, they can shake us off. The tree branch shakes, it can shake us off. If the tree branch breaks, it can knock us to the ground. And so I remember when I was young, I used to love climbing these kind of trees. And so there's this one kind of like pine tree, it kind of has these kind of, as it grows taller, the things under it kind of, they stop living, the ones higher keep living. And, so I had this theory, okay, as long as I stay close to the tree branch trunk just at the base, then then no matter what, those branches probably won't break. So I kept climbing. I get up the tree. All of a sudden, there's this snap, and I fell off this tree. I don't remember much. I remember hitting the ground, and one of these tree branches kind of like cut my stomach. I just actually still have that scar today. I had this kind of delusionous thought that these tree branches are something very steady. And as a result, got this scar. And whatever happened after I got this kind of injury, breathing, remember, you don't realize how much you use a stomach for. You're kind of constantly using this stomach. It's kind of, you're up, sitting down, you're eating, chewing, whatever it is, your stomach is always working. And I was always like, whatever I did, it was a pain in my stomach. And so this can be the way that it is when somebody experiences a loss in their life in samsara. When these kind of things come into a person's life in samsara, these change, you fall off a tree branch, leaning on this branch, it seems solid, and end up with this cut. This cut, you move left, you move right. It's kind of painful. So the Buddha's solution to this is not to find more tree branches to go out onto. His solution is basically to try to find solid ground. Find kind of a solid ground in a person's practice. And this is the wonderful thing about the Buddhist teachings. It doesn't just have to be, all this negative stuff. You're going to start this talk off saying, a lot of negative things. The thing about it is there's also these very positive elements to these things. I mean, we don't have to, totally give up all types of pleasure. This was the other, thing that this monk said to me. What he said was, we were talking a bit about it, and he said, there's this sutta called the Monuments to the Dhamma Sutta. And in this sutta, in the canon there's always these mix of things. I won't tell the whole story behind it, but there's this king who was friends with the Buddha for his whole life. And this king, what he ended up doing was he ends up going to see the Buddha, And the king comes up to the Buddha, starts caressing his feet, kissing his feet, saying, how much he appreciates the Buddha. He was very old at that time. The Buddha was also very old. And one of the things that he said to the king that he appreciated was that, when he goes to the monastery, all the monks there, I think the actual line is they're aloof, like their mind's aloof like a wild deer. So these monks basically seem happy in their holy life. And what they're doing is something that's bringing joy to them. It's not something that's bringing pain and misery or whatever it is to them. These monks are happy. And he said he sees people in other sects, they might be members of that sect for like 1 year, 2 year, 5 years, whatever it is, and they disrobe. Oh, somebody coming here. Oh, Phoenix, come on in.
Hello.
Yeah. And they might be members of the sect for 1 year, 2 year, 5 years, and then disrobe. But he saw these monks in the Buddha's teaching. They were members of his affiliation for their whole life. So what this means is that in these kind of things, in renunciation, this is what I actually asked the Ajahn about. It was my main question for him was, how do you teach renunciation to people? And it's because a lot of the joy that comes from spiritual practice, that comes from the Dhamma, comes as a result of renunciation. I think I've given this kind of a simile before as kind of, when I was young, I think I told everybody I used to smoke a lot of marijuana. You see people who smoke a lot of marijuana, I just can't imagine life without marijuana. It's kind of, I have some friends who just smoke it a lot. I mean, they didn't smoke it when they were babies, but, you think about quitting smoking marijuana. It's like, okay, well, I could quit smoking marijuana and go, to Thailand. That's all right, but, not that great. But then if you take somebody and they've actually quit smoking marijuana, quit drinking, whatever it is, and like, hey, would you like to go back and be re-addicted? They're like, no, I don't want to be addicted to marijuana again. And actually it's the same way with renunciation. It's the same way with giving up our attachment to things, with giving up our desire for things. It's actually our desire for these things that binds us to the pain of these things. And it's because these things, the happiness of not having them is hard to imagine, that it seems like a sheer drop-off. This is the way Buddha described renunciation. It's something you don't know about the benefits of renunciation. It seems like it just drops off. It's just this terrible thing. Nothing else to it. But the thing about renunciation is that giving these things up, there's things that are behind these things. It's kind of like, you see the kind of sky, the kind of classic metaphor. You see the sun gets really covered by this kind of cloud. Kind of cloud goes over top of the sun. You can't see it. It's kind of, all dark. This cloud is humongous, fills the whole sky. But when the cloud disappears, then the sun comes out again. And this is one of the reasons why the Buddha says of the mind, I can't remember the actual Pali word, I think something like pabasarang chittang bhikkhave. In other words, this mind is radiant. The mind is obscured by defilements that come and obscure it. Mind gets obscured by desires that come and obscure it. The mind gets obscured by attachments that come and obscure it. But when these attachments fall away, that's when the brightness of the mind can come to the fore. And people can see the way that the mind is bright, see the way that the mind brings happiness. This doesn't mean that the mind is pure, by the way. What it means is that there's levels of happiness to a person's practice of the Dhamma that are to be experienced. There's levels of happiness that are to be known. There's levels of happiness that we don't know, that can't imagine. The same way, kind of, all right, coming in. Oh, is it somebody coming? Oh, somebody from the retreat. Yeah. Yeah, sure. So in the same way that, these kind of dogs and cats or whatever, there's levels of happiness to their life that they don't know. Okay, don't know the happiness of reading a book, don't know the happiness of watching a movie. There's levels of happiness to our Dhamma practice that we don't know until we experience them. Don't know until we have the taste of them. And this is one of the things. It's hard to imagine them. That's why we hear people talk about these various kinds of things, and we look for that experience in our own lives. Like, when am I going to get this amazing experience? We'll never get it. It's because it's a type of experience we haven't had. It's a type of experience that comes when we're quiet, that comes when these things fall away, that comes when we build this kind of refuge inside ourselves. So I remember before, again, became a kind of Buddhist in high school, and this is kind of a mundane example of when I was young. But I was young, always used to just kind of going out chasing whatever, partying and whatever it was, going to school. I had a kind of quite a range of different experiences. Had a range of experience what it was like to be good student, bad student, well liked, not well liked, have good looking girlfriend, not, all these various things. And remember that after finally coming to the Dhamma, there was this time that it was actually kind of stressful time. That time I wanted to go to university, but I spent so much of high school just goofing off and realized that I needed to take math. But I did not like math. So I, kind of like grade 10 math, I just, didn't care. And then you don't have to take it after that. Unless you want to go to university, then you need OAC. At that time it was grade 13. So you needed to have this OAC math. And the year that I was to graduate from high school was the year right before what they called the double cohort. So this double cohort was this time when they cut out grade 13 and then 2 classes were going to graduate at the same time. That was the year after me. So I had 1 year. If I didn't finish this year, I was going to be going to university with this double cohort, double the amount of people trying to get into university. And I had no math and I needed an OAC math. So I remember I went to ask the guidance counselor about it. She said, okay, you can take this grade 11 math. I think I had grade 10 math. And then it turned out there was an OAC math you didn't need grade 12 math for. So I had this kind of, window of opportunity where I had to finish this grade 11 math in the summer. And by the time the summer was done, everything had to be good. I had to take OAC math without having any grade 12 math. So I basically really took quite a lot of refuge in the Dhamma, especially meditation practice. Find, okay, I can study a lot longer, when I meditate. But, it was a stressful time. It was not, obviously, worried about going to university and trying to finish this correspondence course. And I remember when the guidance counselor handed me the booklet, this other teacher goes like this, yeah, I've seen a lot of people take those. Nobody ever finishes them. Anyways, by the way, I finished that course with a 90, so, in your face, but anyways. Regardless, I remember there was one time I was walking back, my mother had gotten me tutoring for math, because I wasn't that good at it, and I was walking back from the tutoring place, and I was like, am I going to finish this thing? But I was coming over this bridge in Pickering, and I remember looking out over the bridge, and, there was this kind of building, it was a nice day, and I realized that I was actually the happiest that I'd ever been in my life up to that point. I could not recall a point in my life before that where I had been as happy. I can recall points in my life where I'd had more overwhelming sensual experiences, definitely crazier times that people would be like, whoa, that was crazy what you just experienced. Who wouldn't want you, right? I remember times when I was more praised, more adored, when people gave me awards, kind of won this or that thing. I can remember those times, but I couldn't remember another time when I'd been happier than that time. And how do you describe that kind of thing? Well, where there's a bunch of clouds, you're walking back from from your, math appointment. You can't say anything to people about that because there's nothing much to say. But the thing about it is that when these kind of various other addictions fall away, then it's like the clouds uncovering the sun bit by bit. You start to see a little bit of the rays of the sun. You start to see a little bit of this type of happiness, that we didn't know about before, that we didn't have before. And this is a type of happiness that can build. This type of happiness that can grow larger. So this is one of the things, right now, in Pickering, at least, in Scarborough, there's been a lot of rain this year, and quite a lot. So you actually, remember, before I would walk on the beach, there was this huge stretch of beach. They've got all these like abandoned cottages along the line in Pickering, and there's all these kind of like old break walls, and you used to be able to kind of like, go by the wall, ducking under tree branches, walking along the beach. That's all water now. The water's like right up to there. And so because of that, when the waves come in from the lake, if there's wind, of course, if there's strong wind, it'll push the wave further up the lake. But the thing about it is that the water level is much higher. So even with a little bit of wind, that wave comes, farther up the shore than it did the previous year, even with a little bit of wind. And in the same way, this is the way that it works for people when they come to practice the Dhamma. It's not a quick fix. It's like, when am I going to have this crazy, amazing experience? We're looking for this experience like in the movies where it's like, boom, there's all these lights and, it's like a strobe light and I don't know what, whatever else it is. But actually a person's practice is like this, it's kind of like the rain. You just keep putting the water in. Just keep putting the water in. And gradually, the level of that whole lake rises. And when the level of that lake rises, that water reaches to areas where it didn't reach before, even with less wind. And so you can have this kind of strong wind. You can put forth this very, strong effort, which the teachers recommend. And as a result of doing that, you can get some experiences in meditation. But when our practice becomes like this, kind of just slowly filling things up, the whole level of the lake rises. And then even with a little bit of wind, we get to the same place as before. In other words, it becomes a normal thing for our minds. This is what they tend to define. Actually, I remember a friend of mine, he's really into like this neuroscience. I don't know much about neuroscience. I know people have brains. It's kind of, I know there's kind of various parts to them, And so he sent me this kind of neuroscience kind of clip. And it was this story with this fellow, Daniel Goleman, who I think was the author of Emotional Intelligence. And he was saying they did all these studies on these kind of like Tibetan monks. They love to study these like what they call like Olympic level meditators in the Himalayas. And what they find is that, again, basically science is always changing, but just as a kind of way of explaining some of these things, what they find is that, they have this kind of thing called like when you bite into an apple, I think you get these kind of like gamma rays, these very high frequency brain waves. But what they found is in that these kind of high level meditators, people who meditate all the time, it's kind of these, secluded sages or whatever, secluded professional meditators in the Himalayas, that their brain is basically always in this kind of gamma state. You've never seen anything like this before in science. And this is one of the benefits of training our mind. It doesn't have to be this sheer drop-off. The thing about saṁsara is that it's enticing. There's these enticing elements to it. But the elements of saṁsara that are enticing can also serve to obscure. They can serve to cover up the potential for what's beyond them, for what lies past those things that are enticing, for what's better than those things that are enticing. And the tricky thing about them is that it's hard to imagine. Right? You can't imagine that. It's why renunciation seems like a sheer drop-off. It's why samsara seems so great. It's why people, or a young girl, will fall in love with some fellow and end her life because of that fellow, only to be reborn as his daughter because of these enticements. But the thing about the Buddhist teachings is that although when we look at what it's like, come to meditation, practice, she recently just been doing the meditations without much guided instruction. These things are not always going to be fun to do. It's not always fun to come to meditation. It's not always fun to practice meditation. But the thing about doing this kind of thing is it's like gradually filling the level of the lake. Filling it up bit by bit, step by step, drop by drop. And the day comes for us, if we keep practicing and gaining in wholesome qualities, and we keep practicing in getting rid of unwholesome qualities, that we realize that we're happier than we've ever been before. We haven't experienced a happiness like that. And that kind of happiness can become normal. It's become the regular way that people go through their life. So they have this kind of amazing experience. After a while, that's their life. Their life is like that. And it's for this reason that the Buddha describes people who have inner treasures as being wealthy. They're called noble treasures, these treasures that we have in our mind that we own. That we don't, we own them a little bit more. We don't really own it all, the things that are external to us. We don't own the man that we really want to love. We don't own our gold that can get us reborn as a chicken, maybe, in our house. We don't own our families. We don't own our sons. We don't own our daughters. They can do things that we wish they didn't do. They can end their life. They can do other things that we wish they wouldn't do, which are tragic, right? It's kind of, you don't wish that on anybody else. But these are normal things. Normal in the sense that it's always happening. Great things are always happening. Terrible things are always happening. So the Buddha's solution to this is to not to grab onto them, but to build a refuge that leads away from them. A refuge that leads apart from them. And so though we use these branches on the tree to climb, we don't use them to stand on. We don't walk out to the edge of the branch and put all our weight on the branch. We don't put all our weight on our families. We don't put all our weight on our jobs. We don't put all our weight on our health. We don't put all our weight on our physical appearance. We have to put some of our weight on these things some of the time. But always, if we at least, you see these kind of tree climbers, they have straps that like harness them to the tree. If that branch breaks, the strap holds them. They still use the branches to climb. And in the same way, we learn to harness ourselves to the Dhamma. And we learn to strap ourselves to our practice, because this practice will hold us up. This practice does not fail us when the other things in the world fail us. It does not have to go away when the other things in the world go away. This is something that can always be there for us. It's actually only the people who practice who can give it up. So long as they don't give it up, it can remain with them. The level of their life can rise. And this is one of the reasons why the Buddha says about his teachings that they're good. These teachings are good. Renunciation seems scary. It seems like a sheer drop-off. Seems like start the talking about these terrible things that can happen to people in samsara unwittingly. But although samsara is this way, the Dhamma is not this way. The Dhamma is good. The Dhamma is good in the beginning. We have these kind of practices that take us to good things, that give us more strength, so that the teacher tells us, you'll never finish this correspondence course, and you finish it. You can finish it. In the midst of whatever stress there is, you can find happiness there. It's good in the beginning. This Dhamma is good in the beginning, something that leads to happiness in the beginning. This Dhamma is something that's good in the middle. It's good when these things, if you hear the way the teachers talk, if we have experiences of other types of happiness, not just of a mundane sort, but of a completely separate category that we have never experienced before. This is good. Types of happiness that are blameless, that don't depend on hurting anybody, don't depend on eating anything that anybody else has. It only depends on our own inner cultivation. In the middle, the Dhamma is good. And the Dhamma is the best at the end, because it doesn't just stop there with these types of happiness that are like the snake. All these types of happiness have the ability to turn around, and they have the ability to change. But the Dhamma goes towards a goal which doesn't rely on these things at all. It ends in the permanent cutting of defilements. It ends in the destruction of anything that would cause us to suffer. These are things that are real for the people who practice them. And so this is why it's good in the end as well. There's no part of this practice that's bad. There's no part of this practice that's evil. Although elements of the practice may seem difficult, elements of the practice may seem scary, the Buddha does not lead us to things that are bad, only to things that are good. To a happiness that's good in the beginning, to a happiness that's good in the middle, and to a happiness in the end that doesn't change at all.